Good morning. Good morning. Hello. Can we please come to order? Welcome to all of you to Trinity Episcopal Cathedral and to today's really critical dialogue. We're grateful to all of you for your contributions to the lives of thousands of children across this state and beyond. Whether you're a tutor, a mentor, a classroom teacher, a school administrator, public servant, or just an engaged citizen, thank you for everything you do for the children of this state. We have holy work to do this day, and to that cause I will begin us in prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Most holy, most gracious, and loving God, we give you thanks for the beauty of this day. We give you thanks for the children whose lives that we care for, that we raise up, and in your justice and in your mercy send out into the world as creative agents, ones who give glory to all that you have made. Bless our work this day, bless our conversation, and all those who will offer from the gifts you have given them. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen.
I'll be introducing our keynote speaker shortly, but first we'll give you a brief bit of background to this dialogue, followed by a few housekeeping details. Our gathering of bishops began in the 1980s with ecumenical intention toward Christian unity, including bishops of the Lutheran, Anglican Episcopal, Roman Catholic, and United Methodist churches. It has been called for most of its history by the acronym LARCM. Those of us who came into office in the last 5 to 10 years recognized two things. First, that traditional African American denominations with bishops had not been included in the original ecumenical group. Second, that we as bishops were less interested in talking about Christian unity and more interested in enacting Christian unity by undertaking God's mission together. Those realities have resulted in important changes in our work. Today we announce that LARCM is no more, and that we will henceforth be known as the Fellowship of South Carolina Bishops. At this point, that includes the African Methodist Episcopal, Roman Catholic, United Methodist, Episcopal, and ELCA Lutheran churches. Bishops present today, and I ask each of you to stand as I recognize you, are Robert Guglielmone of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Charleston, Jonathan Holston of the United Methodist Conference of South Carolina, Skip Adams of the Episcopal Church in South Carolina, based in Charleston, and myself of the Diocese of Upper South Carolina. My name, by the way, is Andrew Waldo. I forgot to say that. Bishop, our AME brother, Bishop Samuel Lawrence Green, is brand new and just couldn't get it on his schedule yet. And Lutheran Bishop Herman Yos notified us early this morning that he's come down with laryngitis and a cold. So neither of them could be with us today, though we do have one guest bishop with us, Charles Duval, who is the former bishop of Central Gulf Coast in Alabama and the Florida Panhandle. Lives here in Columbia. We hope that the changes that all we've done represent will bring about a deeper collaboration among our denominations for years to come. The goals of the Fellowship of South Carolina Bishops are these: to raise up tutors, mentors, and after-school enrichment volunteers across the state, and together we represent about 800,000 South Carolinians, in support of South Carolina's hard-working teachers and underserved children. To be in dialogue with the South Carolina General Assembly and the Department of Education and the Haley administration to support, encourage, and ultimately transform South Carolina's educational system into a more equitable system, and to raise up the truly great work being done by so many South Carolina teachers and administrators. A few housekeeping details. The restrooms are down the hall. Feel free to get up whenever you want to go out for whatever reason, but that's it. There is coffee and water in this room over here, the Sterling room. So just take breaks as you need it. We will continue throughout the morning, but take breaks as you need them. I believe all of you have gotten your agendas. A note about parking and parking tickets. We have arranged with the Columbia Police Department that any tickets issued during this conference in this neighborhood will be excused. If you happen to get one, bring it to the diocesan office, which is across this courtyard over here. And Susan Heath, Susan, where are you? Susan Heath is our coordinator of this initiative, but Susan will take those and go down to the police department and make sure that you never hear another word about it. So there's no need to get up and pump your meters, okay? I have one particular thank you that I want to make, which is to the cathedral staff, which has done so much to prepare for us today, and especially to Dean Timothy Jones, who is in charge of this wonderful crew here, and thank you all for your hospitality. So, Dr. Hrabowski. I first heard Dr. Hrabowski at a Trinity Wall Street conference in New York City last November, or December. Was it December or November? I can't even remember. December. I was a panelist. I was a panelist for a discussion about the interplay of poverty, racism, and public education. Dr. Hrabowski was our keynote speaker. The South Carolina Bishops' Public Education Initiative has focused primarily on being engaged with preschool and early elementary children in public schools and on advocating for robust legislative support for public education. What we heard from Dr. Hrabowski a year ago, and what I expect we'll hear from him today, is a powerful story that offers a compelling vision. Impoverished children in our public schools who not only thrive at the beginning of their education when communities care and participate in their journey, children blossom when the possibility of higher education nourishes their inquiring and discerning hearts, strengthens them with courage to will and to persevere, and blesses them with joy and wonder in all creation. It is no accident that I draw the phraseology of that last sentence from a prayer for the gifts of the Holy Spirit in the Book of Common Prayer in our baptismal liturgy. For I, like my bishop colleagues here in South Carolina, believe that it is our common life-giving task to recognize and raise up the gifts God has given each and every child from birth. Our purpose today is to hear from Dr. Hrabowski and to leave here inspired and equipped for new action, drawing on what we learned from him. This is a time to be in conversation about what is possible and how we in South Carolina can emulate some of the successes taking place at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where Dr. Hrabowski has served as president since 1992. His profound and innovative leadership has been recognized multiple times by U.S. News and World Report, by Time magazine, which in 2012 named him one of the 100 most influential people in the world, by TIAA-CREF, the Carnegie Corporation, the Washington Post, and Harvard Kennedy School's Center of Public Leadership have all recognized his leadership. This list of honors, achievements, and publications is far longer than I have given you. It especially means much to me that he and I share an Alabama connection. While I was merely growing up in Montgomery, Alabama, young Freeman Hrabowski was a child leader in the Birmingham Civil Rights Movement and was prominently featured in Spike Lee's 1997 documentary, Four Little Girls, on the racially motivated bombing in 1963 of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. So I am particularly honored to welcome Dr. Hrabowski and his wife Jackie. Jackie, where'd you go? There you are. Today. Our conversation following will be an orchestrated conversation due to the number of you who are here today. We have a distinguished panel of guests who will be introduced later and who will respond initially to Dr. Hrabowski's speech. And as he speaks, we encourage you to formulate your questions as you listen. We'll ask you to write your question on a card, and we'll gather these and pose them to the room for our corporate conversation. We anticipate a lively exchange. The title of Dr. Hrabowski's keynote is Holding Fast to Dreams by Looking in the Mirror: Grit, Choices, Destiny. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Hrabowski.
Thank you very much, Bishop Waldo. Thank you very, very much. I am delighted to be here. Jackie and I are part-time South Carolinians. We have a place in Hilton Head, and she gets here more than I do. And my wife is my best critic. I want to say that to you. She's not often in the audience, so I've got to be really good today. I've got to work on this thing today. I want you to know that. And I want to really thank all the bishops for inviting me. They were persistent that I come here. And I got the point that this is a very special place. My dear colleague and mentee and friend and young brother, president of Clemson, is here. He's a graduate of my institution. I told him years ago he was going to be a college president. I just want him to stand. I'm so proud of him, Jim Clemens. Would you stand, please? I'm very proud of him. He's very sweet. And you hear me talking about some of his characteristics and those of one young man sitting next to him whom I met at age 17, when he was 17, and he came to this Mauhoff program that I'm going to talk about, and all the kids were from these big science and tech schools, and he got up to speak, and he said, I'm from the country. And he was from a place called Brandywine, Maryland. And he said, I don't have all the calculus background of some of the kids here. He said, but I play the piano in my church, so I've got God on my side. And he says, and I'm the quarterback of the football team, all right? And he's now a faculty member in mechanical engineering at Clemson University. Oliver, please stand. I'm so proud of him. I really am. And I would say each of them in his own way demonstrates many of the qualities that I'm going to talk about. As I talk about dreams first and the power of education to transform lives, and the notion of grit, as people like Duckworth at Penn will talk about, the notion of persistence, the idea that whatever we believe is important in our lives will be so important we become like that, whatever it is. And as I look at this group, I think about Luke 12:48 that says, of those to whom much is given, much is required. You're here, the bishops are here, because we are saying we have seen many of our own dreams come true. Now, I am a strong believer in stories, that if I gave you theories, you'd go to sleep. But I love math. I get goosebumps doing math, all right? And yet, if I gave you a mathematical theory, my provost from South Carolina appreciates that, Joe, that most people would not appreciate it. But if I give you a story, you'll at least listen. And so, as a person from the South, Baltimore, by the way, I say is the upper South, upper South. One day we think like Philadelphia, the next day like Richmond. It depends on the issue, all right? But I am from, and Bishop Waldo and I are from the deep South. I mean, South Carolina is the South. Alabama is the deep South, all right? And how many of you saw the movie Steel Magnolias with Dolly Parton? You remember at one point, I can tell what age you are if you saw that movie, by the way, right? But you look good. You look real good, right? But I remember at one point they're in the beauty parlor and somebody is talking with great bravado. And the person obviously is lying. And the person leaves, and all these cosmetologists, these beauticians, look at each other, and Dolly says, there's a story there. And the point is, we all have stories. And quite frankly, we are the products of our stories. We don't realize it, but much of what we do as adults, the way we move, the way we think, will come as a result of experiences we had as children. And so I begin with a story about my mother that I tell all the time, who grew up outside of Bishop Waldo's hometown, Montgomery, in a little town called Wetumpka. And as a child, she had the privilege of working in a wealthy home. She had a choice of working in a hot cotton field or working in a wealthy home, of course, a wealthy white home. And she wanted to see what rich people did. And the defining characteristic of the home was that it had a library at a time when there were no public libraries for children of color. And the only book in my mother's home, a wonderful book, was the Bible. And she said the woman was kind enough to say, Maggie, when you finish your work, you can go into the library and read. And Mother began to do that. And she would say, take the book home, to my mother, take the book home. And when you finish it, we can discuss it. And so they did just that. And what happened was this, her girlfriends, Mother's girlfriends, were very upset because they wanted her to come out and play. And sometimes she'd want to continue reading the book. And they would say, why do you keep your nose in that book? This is not school. And it was at that point she began to realize the difference, the growing difference between herself and her girlfriends. And here was the difference, which is at the heart of what I will say even as a mathematician. The more she read, the better a reader she became. And the more proficient a reader she became, the more she loved and enjoyed the experience. And then she read more and more and more. She watched her girlfriends who read only when they had to, and they would be frowning and calling the words quietly, and then they'd push the book away and say, that's not interesting. Well, obviously, nothing is interesting if you can't do it well. It takes a while to get into the habit. It takes that grit to do it. It was at that point she knew exactly what she wanted to do for the rest of her life, the work she considered more noble than any other, to become a teacher. And she became a teacher of English, of language and literature. One of her favorite authors was Zora Neale Hurston, who wrote during the Harlem Renaissance. And in her book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, she begins, ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. For some, they come in with the tide. For others, they sail forever on the horizon, never out of sight, never landing, until the watcher turns his head away in resignation, his dreams mocked to death by time. That is the life of men, and my mother would say, and women. And the point of Hurston, my mother's point, there are two groups of people in society, in any society, people like us, people who've seen many dreams fulfilled. And then there are people who see their dreams, in the words of Langston Hughes, forever deferred. And the point that Mother made all the time, and my father, was that the difference between those whose dreams become reality and those whose dreams are deferred, education. Where would anyone in this room be without a good education? And that's why it's so significant that the people who are at the highest level of the religious institutions in our country, bishops, would say we need to be committed to a fellowship, working together across denominations for the purpose of helping all of our children, children who are from low-income backgrounds, children of color, but all of our children, to strengthen public education. As goes the educational enterprise in any society, so will go that society. Now, the story that I tell about myself in my book is about my being 12, sitting in the back of church, not wanting to be there in the middle of the week. What child wants to be in church, be honest, in the middle of the week? And my parents had insisted that I go and listen to the speaker. And they placated me with the two things I loved most, eating and math. So I was getting fatter and smarter all the time. And Southerners like those cheeks. You all know what I'm talking about. And so I'm eating my M&Ms, the good kind with the peanuts, and I'm doing my math, and I hear this guy at the lectern say, and if the children participate in this peaceful protest, all of America will understand that even our babies want a good education, and they know the difference between right and wrong. And I said, who is that guy? Because I was thinking about all those hand-me-down books I'd had as a kid that I still had. Because, you see, even middle-class children of color their parents could not buy their books because then they would be different from other children. So we all had these torn-up books from the white schools. And I said, who is that guy? And, of course, his name was Dr. Martin King. And I was inspired. And I went home, and I said, I've got to go. And my parents said, absolutely not. You cannot do this. To which I responded, you guys made me go. You made me listen. I did. I now want to do what he says. You are hypocrites. At that time, you did not tell your parents they were hypocrites. You did not do that. Go to your room. Go to your room, boy. But the next day they came in and they said, it wasn't that we didn't trust you. You will have to go to jail if you do this. And we didn't know what would happen. And they allowed me to go. And I tell my students when they say, oh, you must have been so courageous. No. What looks like courage sometimes is simply a determination to want something better, to want to see a dream fulfilled. And I just wanted I wanted to know, what was it about these white schools that was so special that gave them more resources and, quite frankly, supposedly made them even better prepared than I was. I thought of being smart as meaning you work really hard. That was the point. And the point I want to make to you today, as my campus says, it's about grit. It's about grit. Our Chesapeake Bay Retriever, my alums over there appreciate this, is our mascot. And his name is True Grit. And we say that UMBC is the house of grit. And the point we make is, we in America tend to tell children, this group is smart, this group is not. But in fact, it's not about that. It is about one's willingness to do everything she can to succeed. It is about that perseverance, about the resilience. If you read Paul Tuff's book on how children succeed, it talks about teaching them to have that ability to get back up when they don't do well, to learn from the failure, to believe they can do it, and as Carol Dweck at Stanford would say, to have a mindset that says, if I don't do well this time, doesn't mean I can't do it. It just means I've not succeeded yet. There's that word yet. That's so important. And so I want you to think about the fact that I did go to jail. It was a terrible experience, but it was an empowering experience. It taught me that even children could understand that they could have an impact on their own future. And the little bad boys would try to beat us up, and the only book in the library was the Bible. And I figured out with the little kids with me that every time the bad boys would come over trying to beat us up, the kids who were already there for other reasons, if I used the Bible and read and had the little kids repeat after me, everybody would get scared and leave us alone, my little group. So because I was not a courageous kid. The only thing I'd ever fought in my life was a math problem. That's all. You get that now, right? For imagine this little chubby kid, and so I'm there, and all of a sudden the bad boys are coming, and I'm going, the Lord is my shepherd, and the little kids go, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, I shall not want, and the bad boys would move away. So we were able to be with the kind of approach that allowed us to be okay. Fast forward, we went through all of the civil rights period, we went through and then the legislation that allows us to sit here today, and then and the Higher Education Act in 1965 that began to talk about money for people who were not of wealth to go to college. What group do you think resisted veterans going to college in the 40s? The GI Bill you've all heard of, right? What group do you think really resisted people of any race, but mainly white guys, but of any race, and some women going to college in 1944? Who do you think? Yes. College presidents from Harvard to Chicago. They said, if you allow veterans into our institutions, they will become academic hobo jungles. Because it wasn't that they were bad people, they just didn't want to see that change. They did not think veterans would be good for the universities and can do it. And yet, 2 million veterans within several years had gone in and had succeeded. Now, at that time, what percent of Americans do you think had a college degree? Not quite 5% in the 40s, okay? And I mean, for whites, it was about 4%, for blacks, under 1% from HBCUs, okay? And at that time, we counted everything in black and white, even in the 60s. By the time the Higher Education Act came along, all of a sudden, people wanted their kids to go to college because you could get financial aid. What percent had a college degree in the mid-60s? What do you think of Americans? I heard 15. Anybody else? It was only 10%. What percent of whites? It was 11% of whites and 2 to 3% of blacks. And everything was counted in black and white terms. We hadn't gotten to other races. How many of you remember black and white TV? Oh, you're really showing your age. You know, my students always say, what do you mean TV's always been in color? No, not true. No, not true, right? But the point is, today, fast forward, what percent have a college degree? It's literally up to 30%. What percent of whites? It's about 36%. Blacks? Not quite 20. Fastest growing group in our country is what? What percent? Only 15%. And for Asians, it's actually 55% because many come from other countries. My campus has students from 140 countries and about 25% of Asian descent. One of the reasons that we do so well is the international influence. If you want to see the most rigorous environments with the highest standards, look at places that have large numbers of kids whose parents are from other countries. Throughout the 20th century, a disproportionately large percentage of the Nobel laureates, American Nobel laureates, had parents from other countries, often growing up in New York, going to the poor man's Harvard, City College, or Brooklyn College, and going on to get the Nobel Prize from humanities to science. Think about what that means, just how important it is that you would have people from other countries with, what was the difference? It was the hunger. It was the hunger and intensity. And that's where I'm going with this, that today, quite frankly, what will make the difference is our ability to connect with families and children and help them to develop the values, the dreams and the values that many of us were blessed to have because of our upbringings. And here's what I want you to think about. In fact, if it had not been for that civil rights period, we would not be up to a third with a college degree. Now, how many of you in the room are between 25 and between 35 years old and 70? I've got good news and bad. Which one you want first? Bad news is you're getting old, but get over it though. It's okay. You look good. You look really good. All right. I'm over 60, so I can say that. But the good news is if you're an American, you're number 2 in the world. Number 2 in the world. Many would say Norway, and there are others who talk about Singapore. But what's interesting is this. Anybody between 25 and 34? See how proud they are? They're so proud. Right. I've got good news and bad for you, all the young people in the room. Which one you want first? Bad news is you're not as high achieving as we are. You really are not. I love saying that, all right? But the good news for you is we are so jealous. We wish we were your age, all right? We really wish we were your age. I promise you. Even the bishops wish they were your age. Wait a minute. They'd give up being a bishop to be your age. Wait a minute. But the fact is this. Why do I tell you that? People go to college. We always talk about, a large percent went to college. But they don't graduate. And they often go to college starting in remedial work, developmental work of all races, all right? And here's the point. Somebody who begins in that state of going and starting with developmental education has under a 10% chance of getting a 4-year degree. Under 10%. Now, the significance also is that in today's higher education system, almost half of Americans begin in community colleges, and many do quite well. But whether you start at a 2-year or 4-year, if you start in developmental work, there's a very small percentage you will graduate because we haven't figured out the intervention strategies that we need to determine. And so the biggest challenge we face when thinking about education is that those in that bottom quarter economically of our society literally are so prone to not have gotten the academic skills they need in order to start in regular work in college. And that's why pre-K through 12 is so important. As I'm chairing this White House Commission on Educational Excellence for African Americans, the lessons we're learning there are true for all people. The first is we must put much more time on the pre-K to kindergarten period. From the pre-K, from birth up to the first or second grade. Give me a hand for the idea of early childhood education. It's very important. Very important. It's just, and as a college president, I want to be as interested in those issues. My wife has doctoral past, we finished doctoral coursework in early childhood, so she was brainwashing me 40 years ago about this role of language skills and thinking skills that occurs when a child is 3 and 4 years old. And you look at the difference between poor children and other children, quite frankly, and you see the vocabularies are so different in terms of the extent to which one has learned how to think and just basic words, and you build on that foundation. Number two, when we think about developmental education, for most institutions, we're talking about middle school work. We're talking about pre-algebra 2 and reading at the 7th grade level. If we can help a child learn to read, where I began my conversation, if you can teach a child to read, no one can ever take it from her. And you learn to do by doing. And so the idea of relationships, of working with schools, of universities connecting to pre-K through 12 with churches and other institutions to, yes, give them support and develop that sense of self and to help them to feel special, but also, and most important, to teach them those basic skills, the reading skills. And then, as somebody who wrote questions for the math SAT years ago up at ETS and College Board, fact is that if you give me a child who can read well, I can teach her to solve math word problems. Because you see, chemistry and physics and engineering are all actually about word problems. Accounting, word problems. If you know the language of business, you can learn accounting. But they're all about the ability to read and think and to understand that when you have a sentence, you want to be able to understand the relationships among the words, and then you can translate to symbols, and then you can solve the problem. But most American kids, if you ask them the question, do you like word problems? They'll say, no, just give me the equation, right? And it's all about teaching them the connections across words. And so I would argue that as you talk in this community about what you can do, it should be about the notion of the role of higher education in connecting to pre-K through 12, about creative programs that will help children from low-income backgrounds, children of color, and others who can have the opportunity to dream about the possibilities, to see, to witness the role, the impact of hard work. And most important, the opportunity to do on weekends, in the evenings, and in the summer, a lot of emphasis on academic skills and on values, on the importance of respecting authority, on the understanding that if they can get that education, anything is possible. And the two programs I want to tell you about quickly. And the other group that we've not talked about has to do with women and the issues with women. The fact is that if you look at the computer science majors in America, and Jim is a computer science guy, in the 80s, we were up to 36% of women with degrees in computer science. Today, we're back down to about 18%. And many of those women who are making it are from other countries. My Russian young women from Russia, from China, from India, but American girls are not taught to code. One of the most exciting, and large numbers of the jobs for the future will involve technology. And when I talk about STEM, that is not to take away from the arts and humanities. Both are very important. But the key is that many of the jobs will require some understanding of technology, and yet in our country, the culture is such, we push girls away from STEM, from technology, other than emailing and texting and things like that. So one of the most exciting programs we have is one in coding for middle school girls of all races. It's called yoga and coding. They learn yoga and coding. Why? And it's sponsored by the National Security Agency. Why? Because if you teach those children yoga, you're teaching them stamina and assertiveness and the sense of self. It's connecting what we know from the Western world and the non-Western world. And NSA gets that. And the reason NSA is so enlightened is that in other countries, almost half the computer science people are women. Now, let me tell you something that I know nobody in the room knows. Men really don't know how women think. Did you know that? Guys think they know how women think. They really don't. We really don't. I've known my wife 45 years, and I'm still looking, trying to figure it out. Wait a minute. Love her dearly. Wait a minute. Why am I saying that? Because if in other countries the women are experts and they can use strategies and approaches that all the men in America don't get at all, we have difficulty in defending our country. The same thing is true in health disparities. Until we got women into science and in healthcare, all the money in the country for cancer was going to prostate cancer. It took people, it took women doctors and some in political office to say, look at the breast cancer issue. It is as deadly as prostate, if not more. And so the idea of getting people who are underrepresented, whether they're African American, Hispanic, low-income women, very important when thinking about what we should do. And so the emphasis on our MyHealth program to produce more women and particularly African Americans and now low-income whites too, who become scientists, who will help to solve the problems. It's built on the idea from my civil rights work on building community among students, on high expectations. The cover of the book has HIV. What problem is worse, is more difficult in humankind than HIV? But I've got one of my faculty, a white male. I've got one of my students, an African-American male, a MyHealth. Then I have one of my Korean immigrants, a young woman whose parents are from Korea, and I have them on the cover. Somebody wanted me, the publishers wanted me to have all blacks on the cover. I said, no, that's not Dr. King's dream. That is not my dream. That is not the dream of my university. It is that people of all races, men and women, come to trust each other and to develop the skills to work together to solve the problems of humankind. Give the dream a round of applause, the idea of people coming together to solve those problems. And if you look at the national agency, not one national agency in America can say that even 1% of the scientists are black. And it's only 2% Hispanic, and disproportionately large percentages of women who are not there. And so the idea of producing more kids in the STEM areas and others will be critical. The other program I want to mention involves our choice program. If you look up the Shriver Center at UMBC, the choice program is for first-time offenders, children between the ages of 8 and 15. When we and the Shriver family helped us to start this program, Mark Shriver, and when we started the program, the first response from some of my colleagues was, you're going to bring those criminals on our campus? And I said, they're children. They're 12. If you give a child structure and high expectations and love, all things are possible. All things are possible. Do you know we've had children on our campus since 1989? We supervise 500, mainly little black boys, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We bring them, get them up in the morning, take them to school, we bring them on campus, we tutor them, we give them recreation, and we take them back home. And we do it around the clock. Why? Because they need support and they need relationships. And so what I want you to think about that is more important than anything else is this idea. If we can find programs that will take the children and give them those relationships, we can help to build them to the next level. I close, because I want time for questions, with a story about a young man who came to me and said, Doc, I just came back from Russia. And I said, wow. He said, I'm fluent in Russian. I said, what do your parents do? And he said, I never wanted to tell you this. I'm a ward of the state. What was he telling me? His parents were not in his life. He said, here's my story. When I was 12, my dad left us because of drugs. When I was 13, my mom had become hooked. And so they put me in a foster care system. And finally, I got to a group home, and I said, how'd you get to UMBC? He said, a teacher told me that if I wanted to get out of this situation, I had to study, that the only way I could get out of this situation was to pray and ask God for his help and to study. And that's what I did, Doc. I came home every day and I worked and I took an SAT prep and I got to the campus. He said, but I could not live on campus because I didn't have the money. He said, and some days I didn't have food. And so I would find the clean parts on the tray in a trash can. Never occurred to me that one of my students would have to do that. At his graduation, it was as if my deceased mother was saying, Freeman, say something about this boy. I got up and I said, all of you here today really appreciate the value of families. But one of you here today, somebody we love, is here by himself. And when I called his name, there was a gasp because everybody thought of him as the person to whom they told their stories. He never had told people his circumstances. He was so strong, but all of a sudden, one person started applauding, another person, and before you know it, it was like a basketball game. Standing ovation for this child. And I had him come up, and he looked at me with tears, and he said, nobody ever loved me like that. You know, I say to you, if a child has love, everything is possible. We never know what background that child is coming from. And we must use a strengths-based approach to say that every child is a child of God and all things are possible. I challenge you, South Carolina, to watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. I tell my students your character has everything to do with who you are, not only when people can see you, what will you do when your mother's not there? So thoughts become words. Words become actions. Actions become habits. Habits become character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny, dreams, and values. You are so special, South Carolina, and you can be even better. Thank you all very much.